Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we are joined by the wonderful Isabelle Fuhrman to talk all about her latest film, The Novice. And I wanted to start by talking about working with Lauren Hadaway, who's the writer and director of film, because it sounds like she had an incredibly specific vision for how she wanted to tell this story. And that part of that was also creating a lookbook that she shared with the cast, shared with the crew, so that everybody came in with a really unified idea of how she wanted to tell the story. And how did a lot of details that she gave you, like that lookbook, really help you in terms of honing and figuring out the details of your performance and how you wanted to approach the character within the film?
I remember what first floored me about the lookbook wasn't just like the imagery that she had of like the location she wanted to film in, or even like her statement of the story, but the way that it was done. Like Lauren hand wrote everything in the book. She also hand wrote like our credits in the movie. Like there was something about it that just seemed like I could tell that not only was the story, coming from a very real place with her, but also at the same time, I was very aware that she was so invested in this. And the lookbook really kind of went through almost in a visual way as much as the movie does, the sort of like obsession of like telling the story, which as an actor, when you read a script and it like floors you and then you get sent a lookbook on top of it, very often it like gives you a very good overview of what style someone wants to film something in or what they want it to look like. And Lauren's lookbook was very different in the sense that it was basically her saying like, I have to tell this story and this is why. And her vision was such a through line through our first conversation, even to like every single day on set. I think everyone on the crew and cast got the script and the lookbook. And I think it gave everybody kind of an understanding of what we were trying to achieve together. And when you're on set, you have like a couple hundred people or hundreds of people working on something. It's very rare that you feel like we're all working in unison. And it kind of felt like we were in our own like boat. We were all kind of like breathing the same breath and like taking the same strokes. And it was really such a team like effort the entire time. And I think it was really Lauren like set that tone from the very beginning. And I knew that I wanted to do this part like from reading the script, but her lookbook kind of gave me this image. I was like, I can totally see what she wants to do. And I'm the person to help her do this. And so then it was really just about like, convincing her that I was the person she needed to cast.
And did that unison and the way that she communicated that with everybody, did that also change the way that you were working on scenes when you were filming things? Because you, again, were just coming in with a really clear idea of what she wanted already. So did it allow you to kind of almost have conversations at a deeper level about the minutiae of a scene instead of really figuring out the top basic levels at the beginning?
She gave me a lot of freedom to play with different things. I think, and Lauren spoke about this a lot, like since the movie has been completed and we've been doing press for it. And it's funny because she didn't really talk to me much about it while we were filming, but she really felt like she cast me because I was in a lot of ways Alex. And I think I didn't really want to admit it to myself for the longest time, but I really am. And like my like script, for example, like had all these like binder tabs. I was like writing on every single page. So much of the movie I'm not speaking. So a lot of it was really kind of like going through what exactly is going on in my head during every single moment. And also Alex doesn't spend a lot of time being present. So like there has to be a whole other world that I'm kind of living in while I'm in a scene with somebody sometimes. And so we really we spoke about everything and kind of the beats of the story. And, we would obviously, you'd block a scene and we'd figure out how exactly we want to do it. But what I loved about Lauren is like, there were very specific moments that she would pick to be like, I want you to like cry and kind of laugh here, and I was like, but I totally understood what she meant by that. It wasn't like I knew what she meant. We were speaking the same language the entire time we were filming. And so I felt like we really kind of like vibed off of each other. And there were things that like I brought to the table that I think she didn't even realize, like, and also just from the actual physical transformation that I had to go through. Like I learned so much through that process and I felt so much pressure to be the best on set. at the same time that my own hands were bleeding and I was like sore all over the place and I barely felt like I could move. I mean, I would literally get back to my hotel and like sit in a bath for like 20 minutes, almost fall asleep, and then be like, okay, I got to get into bed because I have to wake up in the next morning and do the next thing. So I really felt like falling into that step, and Lauren really helped facilitate that by really making it like being very adamant that I had to row the entire movie. And I was like, I'm game. And then you realize how difficult that is, but I did it. And it's because she believed in me and that we kind of were able to trust each other about where we were going. And I love her so much. We're such close friends now. I mean, we really bonded during this movie. I don't think there's any other movie you can bond on with somebody with if you're like stuck in a boat for hours the whole day and it's raining and it's freezing cold and you're just like, gosh, I love what I do. But you're also like, yeah, we're crazy for loving this at the same time.
Did that physical transformation and even just that internalized pressure that you felt yourself, did that really help in terms of the internalization of this character? Because to the point that you made before, she's someone who doesn't really talk to people a lot. A lot of the film is actually really experiencing what's going on inside her head, the pressure that builds up within her, and kind of the fact that she is her own worst enemy in terms of the competitiveness that she creates for herself. And that's such an internalized performance that you give so beautifully. And so did all of that transformation and that pressure that you felt as well really feed into the way that you were able to capture that in that specific way?
100%. I think that, you know, I personally have this kind of like drive that I've always had since I was a kid. And that's something Lauren and I spoke about too, like how some people just have this drive and you don't know where it comes from. Like my parents never pressured me about grades, but like for some reason I get so mad at myself for doing anything less than an A+ or 100% or whatever. And so that taking that attitude and bringing that into this, that I already innately have, and bringing that into this character, like every single day waking up and training, I felt slightly isolated at times because you're waking up at 4 a.m. before anybody's even awake. And then I'm training for 6 hours every single morning on the water. And then the only time I really have, I'm spending either eating or sleeping so I can be prepared for my next workout, stretching so that way I'm not sore the next day for the next workout. And then I'm just like reading through the script. And really at the same time, I felt like I was living and breathing this world. Like I was learning an entire world. Of rowing and what that sport entails at the same time as I was learning it through the script. So I really felt that I was going internally through a lot of the same processes that Alex was. I was like, I have to be the best. I constantly felt pressure on myself. I don't think I felt competitive necessarily with anybody on set because I knew that all the girls in the rowing boats were like so much better than I was because they've been rowing for years. And Amy Forsyth and I were both, learning basically for this film. She plays Jamie, but I really internalized this feeling of like, I needed to look convincing that I could beat these people, that I could win, that I could show all of them that I can. And that was a lot of pressure that I put on myself. I think, I didn't realize how exhausted I really was until the end of the shoot. And I really just kind of like collapsed almost when I came home because it was like I was having such a great time and living and breathing this, but at the same time when it was all over, it was kind of like, well, what next? Which I think Alex experiences in the movie as well. It's like, well, what do I do next? All of my attention was in this one area. And now what am I supposed to do now? So I think that as an actor, you always kind of pull from yourself in certain ways when you play characters, but in this case, Alex felt very close to home in a lot of ways. I mean, I live in my own little world, but more in like a dreamy sort of sense. I'm very creative and I'm constantly like painting or sculpting or doing something, if I'm not filming. And I love exercise too. Like that was that's another thing that I do. If I'm not filming, I'm exercising. So that way I can be like, okay, I'm still working towards something. But with Alex, it was kind of like playing with this idea of really like, what does it mean to tear yourself apart from the inside out? And Lauren spoke about this a lot while we were filming and since about how when we see men kind of project outward their anger or their shame or what they're feeling. And women, we internalize that and we explode from the inside. And that's a very different process to watch. because she's not going after anyone, screaming at them and yelling at them. She's literally picking apart every single thing that makes her herself. And it's not like people around her are trying to pressure her or anything. She really is like her biggest enemy and her biggest ally, but she doesn't really know that she could be her biggest ally, biggest coach, biggest friend, because she's so set on really proving to herself that she's, enough as the person that she is.
And rowing is such a technical sport, not just in terms of what you're doing as an individual, but also the way that you're working with everybody else in the boat. And we even see that synchronicity in the scene where you have to switch seats with someone in the boat and all of the technicality that comes into that. And to your point, you had to be able to develop a skill set where it looked on screen like you could compete and you could beat any of the other rowers. But obviously, with the amount of time that you have, you're not going to reach the same level that they do. So did you find that you were really honing in on certain specific skills, or what was the minutia of really figuring out what was necessary in order to be able to visually portray that?
I think the big thing was Alex's big shining moment is the single scull. And what I realized only really until I got on set, because the majority of the time I had, I was single sculling. I was using like a single boat. And I was falling in and learning how to get back in the boat and, experiencing all that at 5 a.m. And I remember when I did only like 3 or 4 days where I was in a boat with somebody else. And it was with Amy when she came back from working on another film. She came to LA. And then I spent one morning, I drove to Long Beach to literally they called me the morning of, they're like, we have a spot if you want to go in an 8, which I had never done. And I was supposed to do that in the movie. So I was like, okay. But I realized like being in the boat with everybody is so much more complicated than being in a single, at least for me, because I was spending so much time in a single. But all the other rowers talked about how being in a single is so much more complicated than being in a boat of an 8 or 4 or something like that. And so that's when I kind of had this sort of like confidence of like, maybe that's where Alex is. Like, maybe that's where she is like and which coincides with her journey and her personality. Is like, she's not as great in the boat with everybody else. She's not a part of the team, but like she can kick anyone's butt if she's in the single, because I always felt like, we see those bits of her learning in the single, that is what she then does every single morning from then on out. She takes the single out, she goes. And that's why like at the end of around the lake row, she's carrying the boat over her shoulder. It's like, she's really grown from the first time we've seen her in that space, but she's also realized that like, she didn't necessarily need to prove it to anybody except for herself. And then now what? So I'd say the little minutia was really kind of like honing in on that the single and really being like, okay, this is where I want to master the most. Like, I don't mind if I don't look the best in the group, because I don't think that I'm supposed to. I don't think that Alex cares to look the best in the group. Yeah, she wants to be in the boat, but she wants to be in the boat because she earned it on her own. So I really felt like that kind of gave me a little bit more of a confidence, and also helped me kind of figure out where she was during filming. And those are things that you just discover along the way, really.
Yeah. And similarly, a lot of the physical training that you were doing wasn't even just about building up the stamina. It was also about building a certain physique that fits rowing. And I think you said you're like 5'5", and like rowers even tend to be a little bit taller. And so trying to figure out what that looks like, what were like the muscles that you felt like you really needed to hone in the physical structure that you really wanted to have for this character, because then that parlays into your performance and her poise and the way that she moves as well.
Yeah, I think my trainer, Beck Wilcock, and I really focused on my traps and my shoulders, which are the muscles you use when you pull back when you row, and also like my glutes and my quads, because being smaller, that means that the majority of your stroke has to come from that first push with your legs, legs, body, arm, that whole thing. So, it was cool though, because it's true. All of the rowers are so tall. And it was funny because like tall people, like all the tall people were there. And Lauren's like, well, in the script, technically you're like 5'8". And I was like, thanks. So I was like, it really helps me out. But it's a very tall person sport because it expands your stroke and it allows you to move through the water more. And so being smaller than everybody else really also kind of puts you in that place of like, well, I need to, I need to be a little bit better like this. I need to kind of hold my head up a little bit higher and really seem like tougher than I am. Sort of like, you just see small dogs sort of do. It's like they're a little bit more vicious sometimes, more bark than actual bite. So I really felt like that, really I was like looking up online and watching videos of like Olympic rowers and things like that, and talking with my trainer about it. And that was really kind of the big thing physique wise, was I gained 12 pounds of muscle. I was eating so much, and I was working out every single day before and after I went to set as well. And then for certain days I worked with a bodybuilder to learn how to dehydrate, because there are certain days that I needed to look like I do at the end of the movie, and then certain days where I need to look like I'm not. And that was a whole other thing that I didn't even realize. And that's just for like aesthetic purposes. I mean, that doesn't necessarily help, you feel great when you're like drinking a quarter cup of water for a single day. But I felt like it was important in the story of Alex that like we went from a place of like her just being like any other college student to like really kind of looking almost unhealthy, and like all she is just her rowing muscles and bone, and that's really about it. And it was really cool to see that transformation. It really helped me kind of get into the character. And like I said, like being sore every single day is a great feeling when that's where you're supposed to be at as a character and as a person. It's like you're supposed to feel pain everywhere you walk, and I definitely did.
And as a character, she's someone who, she is talented at rowing, but she also looks around her and sees other people who just have more of a natural aptitude towards it. So, but she knows that if she puts in twice as much work, that she can bring herself up to a certain level. Was that something that even when you first read the script early on, that really came across to you, or did that come out from the conversations that you and Lauren had about what is her natural skill level, and then what's her skill level with the added dedication that she throws into it?
We talked a lot about how Alex is like haunted in her life by the naturally gifted. And I think a lot of people in any work situation can relate to that. I personally can too relate to that. I mean, we talked about it a lot during filming, but especially kind of prior to when we started the film, which is, even Alex says that to Jamie, like your mistake is that you always stick to what you're good at, which is like, I think there are a lot of people who have a natural talent for things, but they can only get so far when it comes to that. I mean, you can be naturally talented at things and get to a certain level, I think, in any career, but there's like a certain amount of resilience, I think, that you either build up or you don't. And I work in the film industry, where like you see a movie and like overnight somebody is like all of a sudden on the top of everybody's casting list, and you're like, well, who is this person? I've never seen them do anything, and they haven't done anything. And it's like their first part is what kind of takes them to where, people work years, like their whole career to get to. And it really is kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I as a person, I think struggle with that too sometimes, where, I think my mom always says this, and I think I always take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's true. It doesn't matter how hard you work. Like there are always things that will push people ahead of you in certain areas of your life, or will push you back. And like the only thing you really have control over is who you are and how you proceed in your life, and how it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. And I think that's something that throughout this movie, I really kind of thought about as Alex, and I thought was really interesting, is like, she learns at the end, it's about working smarter, because it's about working for those three races, the seat race, the around the lake row, those three goals that she sets for herself. That's like working smarter. But at the beginning, we're just watching her like struggle to keep up, struggle to like, be something more than just like somebody in the novice class. And I think that that's a really, really interesting thing to play with as an actor, and also as somebody who sometimes experiences that. Is it's like you do have to just let go. There's nothing you can sometimes do. Yeah.
And it's interesting to watch the journey that she has in becoming more and more isolated, because she never really finds the way to be part of the team. And there's almost a side journey with the more time she puts into it, the more dedication, the more her skill set grows, is actually the more isolated she becomes, because she's not figuring out how to do it in tandem with everybody else within the room. And so did you see real parallels between those two journeys side by side with one another?
No, I definitely did. I think that, the isolation, though, I always felt was self-inflicted with Alex. Like, I really feel that way. Like, that's why I found so interesting about this movie and like our larger conversation right now about mental health is like, very often we are our worst enemy without even meaning to be. And it's like Alex comes into this sport really with kind of like, sort of like a first love, like these sort of like clunky beginnings, falling in love with the sport, thinking it's really interesting. And then when the relationship kind of starts to turn toxic, is when it's no longer about enjoying what she's learning. It becomes about being better, being the best, but not really knowing when to quit, not knowing when to take a step back, not knowing when to take a break, not knowing when to tell herself that she did do a good job, or, like actually listen to someone who says, relax. And I personally am like that too, but I think that's what I found so beautiful about the relationship between Alex and Danny, is that Danny as a romantic partner for her, I think it's the first time when they have that big blowout argument and they break up, it's the first time that I think Alex hears her. Like, even though she doesn't listen, she hears her. And I think that is kind of what spawns her growth towards the end of the movie, really, is her kind of for the first time listening maybe to herself since the movie begins. And listening to herself say something good. Like, you were the one who held out. You're the one who did it. You're the one who finished. And so I feel like there's a really, like you were saying, that sort of like tandem journey. I feel like there is another world where Alex could be a part of the team, but I think she prefers to be misunderstood. I think she prefers to feel like an outsider looking in. I don't think she has any interest in being on the inside of anything. She doesn't want to be in a sorority. She doesn't want to be on the team. She just wants to really prove to herself that she's, like I said, enough. And I think a lot of people relate to that. I mean, and that's why I think that this movie is different than like your typical kind of underdog story or story about obsession, and differs from like Whiplash or from, Black Swan. Is like, she's not trying to prove herself to a teacher or overcome her, her competition with Jamie, who's in the rowing team with her. It's really about her trying to overcome this battle within herself.
And with that idea of describing her just now as an outsider looking in, and that being something that she almost enjoys, did that feed into the way that you wanted to play the scene when she goes to the frat party? Because it doesn't feel like, it feels like she's trying to have fun and do the right things, but isn't necessarily experiencing the fun that she's trying to set about. So it was a really interesting scene to watch the way that she approaches that. And it's almost like, great, now I can take this off the list and I've done this. I don't need to do this again.
Yeah, no, I totally love that. I think it was one of those scenes that when we were first going through edits of the movie, people were like, this makes no sense. And I was like, it makes total sense, because you're in college, you're like trying out new things and testing out new things. And like, this is the list of things she wants to do in college. I mean, I did stuff like that when I was in high school and in college age. Like, I would make a list. I went to London for school for a summer and I made a list of things that I wanted to do. Like, like I wanted to have a kiss here or whatever. And like, you make those things happen if you want them to. I think that there's something really kind of interesting about her personality, where it's like, she's going to get the drunk college one night stand, like, out of the way, like, done. And playing with that kind of more, front-footed part of her personality early on, especially because you see her almost kind of like, you feel bad for her at the beginning when she's on the rowing team. And I really liked, there's like this moment where you can see that like, she's really pretty feisty, but just wait, just wait until it really hits her what she needs to do. And even Lauren and I talked about how like she wrote this actually in the lookbook, that Alex is a conquistador. Like, she conquers this sport for herself. And so that was something that I kind of thought about, is like, she in high school was, we know kind of through the movie, you talk about her high school experience, like she conquered that like academic achievement, even though she was forced to stop. She has this list. She's going to like conquer this list of things she wants to do. Like, she's one of those people who sets out to do something and will do it, see it through all the way to the end. to her own detriment sometimes.
And psychologically, in terms of the different spaces that you had to carry her to, and what we were talking about earlier with how it is such an internalized performance throughout the movie for you, what were some of the particular scenes or moments or arcs that were the kind of like the more challenging aspects to tap into in that way?
I think big moments were like, I think the biggest moments were actually the smallest ones. Like when the first 2K erg test happens and Jamie gets a faster score, even though, you know, Alex hit the ground before she did and she thinks she finished first. Like that was like a huge moment. Like I really kind of was like trying to think about how much of a gut punch that would feel like. And not necessarily that she beat her, but that she thought originally that she beat Jamie. And I think that is kind of like, you know, that hurt even more because it's not Jamie, it's her. And kind of playing with that, those like little beats that we see throughout the story, also kind of in tandem with like the big, you know, breakup scene with Danny, who played by Delone, because that scene was like, probably the most emotional scene in the entire movie. You get to know the most about Alex during that moment. And I remember talking with Lauren and we decided to make that scene a closed set because we wanted to really kind of hone in on the intimacy of that moment. And it really became like its own thing. I mean, it was really me, Lauren, Delone, and Todd, our DP, locked in a bathroom for a couple hours. And you know, that's why the camera seems to be like struggling to find us, is because we really just did it as basically as like one take all the way through. And the take that they ended up using in the film, Delone just started grabbing at my shirt, like to lift it up. That wasn't something that was originally scripted. And all of a sudden it was like we had completely changed into a completely different territory. And then we were on the floor and then we were crying and then Lauren calls cut. And then I was like, I don't even know what just happened. And we all just sat there and cried, like all of us, all four of us, for about like 10 minutes. And she's like, I think we're good. I think we're good with the scene. And those are just like moments that I got. I mean, I felt so lucky to have actually that moment because so much of it is internalized, and being able to be in a room with Delone and work off of her was so special for me, because anytime I got to have a scene like, and even that scene with Jamie in the hallway, like being able to have those moments where we see Alex actually interact with people, I felt was like the most fascinating thing to play with, because so much of the story, she's on her own. And we get little glimpses of who she is in those moments. And I really wanted to just be present in those, because I feel like she's so not present in any moment when she's like living her life, that those moments felt like they needed to be like incredibly present for them to make sense. And so I really am just grateful for the other actors, because I really just got to react off of them, truly.
I mean, it's really remarkable when you step back and look at the fact that you are in every single frame of the film and what you've managed to do with that performance. So congratulations on everything with the film. And thank you so much for talking about it.
Thank you. I'm really excited about it.